Drupal is a great tool for working on the web, but to get a little bit of perspective, we're going to take a little bit of a step back in time. In this lesson, we're going to review a little bit of the basics of content management and web history, so we can sort of see what has progressed, what changes have gone into place, and then we're going to look at what problems have been encountered and where parts of Drupal help us address the problems that we've historically had when it comes to building websites. So let's take a little journey back in time. Back in the dim recesses of time, or the 1990s, web pages were nothing more than simple text files nestled comfortably into folders on a server somewhere on the internet. With names like index.html, news.html, aboutus.html, and so on, these files were viewable by anyone with a web browser. Using HTML, hypertext markup language, these files could link back and forth to each other, include images and other media, and generally make themselves presentable. A website was just a collection of those files in a particular folder. So in the example that we see here, there's the index.html, but then there's the about folder and the news folder, which each contain their own HTML files. This system worked pretty well, and it made sense. Every URL that a user on the internet could visit corresponded to a unique .html file on a web server. If you wanted to organize your site into sections, you made a folder and moved the files into that folder. So for example, example.com/news would be the address to the news section of the site, and the 1997 newsletter would be located at example.com/news/fall_1997_products.html. When the webmaster needed to fix a problem, he could look at the page in his web browser and open up the matching file on the web server to tweak it. Unfortunately, as websites grew in size, it was obvious that this approach didn't scale well. After a year or so of adding pages and shuffling directories around, many webmasters had dozens, hundreds, or sometimes even thousands of pages to manage. And that, friends, caused some serious problems. So changing the site's design required an enormous amount of work. Information formatting, layout, site design was done individually on every single page. Cascading style sheets hadn't yet taken the web world by storm, so tasks as simple as changing the site's default font required hand editing every single file. The site structure resulted in massive duplication of content as well. Most designs for websites included a standard footer at the bottom of the page with copyright contact information, a header image, or some kind of recurring navigation menu. If anything changed, every file had to be updated. If you were very, very lucky, all the webmasters before you had been conscientious about making sure that there were no layout variations. Websites were also impossible to keep consistent and up to date. Most complex sites were already organized into directories and subdirectories to keep things reasonably tidy. Adding a news story in the news directory meant that you had to update the overview page that listed all the news stories, perhaps post a quick notice on the front page of the site, and remember to take the notice down when the news was no longer fresh. A large site with multiple sections and a fair amount of content could keep a full-time webmaster busy just juggling updates. The search for solutions to these problems prompted the first real revolution in web design, the use of scripts and Common Gateway Interface, or CGI, programs. The first step was the use of special tags called server-side includes, or SSI, in each HTML file. These tags let web designers tell the web server to suck in the contents of another file, say a standard copyright message, and include it in the current web page as if it were part of the HTML file itself. It made updating those bits much easier as they were stored in only one place, but used in multiple. The second change was the use of simple databases to store pieces of similar content. All the news stories on CNN are similar in structure, even if their content differs. The same is true of all the product pages on, say, Apple, or all the blog entries on Blogger, and so on. Rather than storing each one as a separate HTML file, webmasters used a program running on the web server to look up the content of each article from the database and display it with all the HTML markup for the site's layout wrapped around it. URLs such as example.com/news 1997/big sale HTML were replaced by something more like example.com/news news.cgi?ID equal 10. Rather than looking in the news directory, then in the 1997 directory, and returning the bigsale.html file to a user's web browser, the web server would run the news.cgi program, let it retrieve article number 10 from the database, and send back whatever text that program printed out. All these differences required changes in the way that designers and developers approach the building of websites. But the benefits were more than worth it. Dozens or even hundreds of files could be replaced with one or more database-driven scripts. Even with those improvements, however, there were still serious challenges. Figuring out where to change things. Large sites with many different kinds of content, product information, employee bios, press releases, etc., were still juggling an assortment of scripts, separate databases, and other elements to keep everything running. Webmasters updating content often had to figure out where they needed to change an HTML file or an entry in the database or the program code of the script. The dynamic content, such as discussion forums or guest books where you actually have visitors interacting, required their own infrastructure, and often each of these systems was designed separately. Stitching them together into one unified web experience was not an easy task to do. Slowly but surely, programs emerged to manage these different kinds of content and features using a single, consistent user interface. The older generation of software focused on a particular task or application, but newer CMS implementations offered generalized tools for creating, editing, and organizing the information on a website. Most systems also provided mechanisms for developers to build add-ons and new features without reinventing the wheel. Content management systems would use a single database and a single script to integrate all of those features. Drupal is one of these next-generation content management systems. It allows you to create and organize many kinds of content, provides user management tools for both the maintainers of and the visitors to your website, and gives you access to thousands of third-party plugins that will add new features. Dries Boytart, the founder of the Drupal project, said in a speech in the 2007 Open Source CMS Summit that his goal for Drupal was to eliminate the webmaster. That might sound a bit scary if you are the webmaster, but after that first thought, the implications are pretty exciting. Thanks to Drupal, the grunt work of keeping thousands of pages organized and up-to-date vanishes. You can instead focus on building the features that your site needs and the experience that your users want.